I'm really thrilled about this. I'd like to introduce you to Nando Sigona. It's over to you if you'd like to tell us a little bit about yourself, and then away with Superdiversity.
All right. I sit down because I tend to move a lot when I give lectures, so in order to fit with the camera there. I'm a researcher at the University of Birmingham, and I'm also affiliated to the University of Oxford Refugee Study Centre and the Centre on Migration Policy and Society. My work covers a range of issues. At this moment of time, I'm doing quite a lot of research around the issues linked to the refugee crisis, and I've been carrying out interviews in Italy, Greece, Turkey, and Malta with colleagues. I'm also doing research on unaccompanied minors and what happened to them once they become adults. As a deputy director of the Institute for Research into Superdiversity at the University of Birmingham, my main area of work is around issues of legal status and citizenship, and to what extent the way that the citizenship is becoming precarious. So the idea that migration status and immigration law and refugee law makes the individual more vulnerable than it used to be by creating a series of legal positions that are always never solid, in a sense. They're becoming much more fluid. What I'm going to talk today is more sort of an introduction to the concept of superdiversity, and also to start to think about some of the implications of this concept, of moving away from traditional terms such as superdiversity or even integration. What I'm trying to do is to see to what extent, if we look through the lens of superdiversity, also terms such as integration of race relation change and turn to something relatively, we can say, new in many ways. So what I'm going to do first is to give you a brief introduction on superdiversity, and then look into what does it mean really embrace a superdiversity term, what are the key implications for this in terms of policy making. We will watch a short video about Canada and education system. I will then give you an example of Birmingham as a city and how superdiversity happened, what are some sort of key dimension of Birmingham superdiversity, and then in the end just give you a flavor of the kind of research we are carrying out at the University of Birmingham. So the term is relatively new, was introduced, the term superdiversity, at the end of the 2000s by Steve Vertovec, professor of anthropology and migration at the University of Oxford. And it was developed in order to explain what was going on in London in particular. So the idea that we are seeing a level of diversity, especially as a result of migration and international migration and displacement, that we haven't observed in the past. And you start to think about what are the implications of this. But it's not just about how many countries of origin people come from. Is also how this new migration relate or intersect previous layers of diversity, and also how there are other dimensions that we should look at in a sense when we talk about diversity. So the idea is to move away from a compartmentalized idea of each person is the ethnic group of the country of origin they come from. So you want to be enabled, when you explain how society is the complexity of a society, that you acknowledge more forms and dimensions of diversity, and we start to think about how these different dimensions relate to each other. So we're looking at the issue of gender, sexuality, but also legal status in relation to, especially to migrants, age, ethnicity, faith, but also simply reason for migration, for example. And also start to think about in what way, for example, the layering of diversity works and operates in specific areas. So we'll show later in relation to Birmingham, we will see how this new migration will links up with previous one, and how these are mapped against the city urban space. But it also raises important question about the new and old inequalities. So when we talk about the fact that there is, in what way, for example, superdiversity can or cannot help us to understand pattern of inequality. And let's not forget, we are in a society where the differential between the rich and the poor is increased rather than decreased. So is this a manifestation of superdiversity, or is something else. So to what extent, when we talk about superdiversity, we are not incurring in the risk of accepting social economic inequality. It's an important issue to bear in mind. And finally, I want to sort of show how this is not just something about London, although London is still a very important space where observing these dynamics. So this chart here behind me is capturing the country of origin in Frankfurt, in Germany. So what you see here is rather than see few large groups from a smaller number of countries, you see that increasingly what you observe is smaller national or ethnic groups, but from a very large range of countries. Just to give you an example, in the city of Birmingham, according to the 2011 census, there were 187 nationalities. Milan, there are 140. In Rotterdam, 160, but also in the BRIC countries, like Sao Paulo, we have over 100 nationalities. And if you include also, for example, ethnic communities, the number gets even bigger. So if you look at, for example, at Toronto, you have over 200 groups that are there. So what does this mean in terms of policy making? What does it mean in terms of integration? What are we integrating into? And it's also an important implication, I would say, about how do we discuss and understand race in inverted commas, or whiteness. So just to give you an example here, I think that Canada is an important case study to observe the extent to which superdiversity can become part of the way that we think at us, at ourselves, rather than at them.
I think a diagnosis of...
That's an adverse, I think.
Where people
will
speak every different language, have every different background, where instead of looking at multiculturalism as a whole bunch of a mainstream culture, going to a school gym on a given day and going to different booths and sampling samosas here, and then going over to see a Berber dance over here, and then we have instead an entire school celebrating Diwali, the Festival of Lights, or looking up the Chinese horoscopes, or talking about how to support your friends going through Ramadan. I mean, the range of experiences become the mainstream in Canada, and for me, that happens within our public schools. It happens within our education, and that is, for me, the answer when people say, oh, these folks aren't integrating into our value systems quick enough. For me, how we ensure that education gives people the tools to understand that you don't have to choose between the identity that your parents have, and being a full citizen of Canada. That yes, there are behaviors and attitudes that are different. That growing up a second generation Muslim girl in Canada means you may have to have a difficult conversation with your parents about lipstick, or about that Indian boy you're dating, or whatever. But these are things that do not weaken the fabric of who you are and the society you belong to. And it's not easy, and that's why you can't do it overnight. But that's where a diverse and open and inclusive education system and open circle of friends is what we have to work towards in our communities.
Okay, thank you. So I think here what we see, it's a very important statement about how do we formally understand who we are, and also thinking in terms of what are the implications. I don't need you make example of other countries that take a very different approach to diversity and others within society. But I think it's important to look at Canada as a best practice, let's put it this way, to look at it positively. So I think I need to go back further. So if we move into to look at Birmingham, and I want to give you an example of in what way the city has become more diverse, and also what this can help us, what we want to start to look at. Because one of the problems with looking at super diversity is that also they challenge some of the category we have to understand reality. So, for example, last year I went to the US for a conference, and we were talking about what extent New York is becoming more or less diverse. But the problem is that if the categories you use to understand reality don't really acknowledge that there is something happening that is diverse, then you miss it. For example, if you use the term Latino in the context of the North America, and in the Latino term you conflate everyone that comes from Central and South America, obviously you are basically killing diversity. You are basically erasing the history of everyone who is in the country that is not with a term. There are reasons for this. There is a politics of the use of the term Latino. But it's also interesting to see that, for example, you are not able to appreciate that there are intermarriages between Argentinian and Colombian because you don't have the category to look at it. So you don't understand that there is super diversity happening. It's not happening according to your category. So we need to problematize and unsettle some of the terms we use. Obviously, if you, within the UK context, obviously you got still the colonial terms and the colonial racial categories of white, other white, Irish white, travelers white, black, degree of blackness and things. These are problematic in many ways, and we need to unsettle some of them. They're not necessarily captured, for example, the diversity which you have. If you use a term like Asian, you're talking about a few billion people. And to what extent you can understand that there are patterns of inequality within this group is if you do basically group all together. And then implicitly the answer you give to these issues will embed those categories. So we need to problematize the categories in the way that we look at reality. What I want to show here is about how Birmingham's changed. So in the first map, you see that basically the historical migrants and minority community in Birmingham were concentrated mainly in some areas, with some of these areas reaching over 85–90% of BME population. But you see that if you look at new groups, they are much more spread in the city, and they are almost everywhere. So to various degrees. So you see from an idea of few groups concentrated in one place to a much more transformation covering the whole urban area. That is that. Another element which is interesting, this one is that doesn't capture the country of origin at birth of the people in the country. So you can see that in some areas you've got over 40, 50 country of origin in a specific ward, which is quite important. And also you have the distribution across the city. So you've got some areas, this is above the 80%, and then in any case it's always above the national average. And finally, I think it's also important, this map about whiteness, because sometimes we forget, we take for granted that, the diverse are all the non-white are the diverse one. And I always remember at some point when I was doing my research in Newham here in London, and there was, someone pointed out to me that, the largest white group in these schools are Polish. The largest English-speaking groups are British Jamaicans origin. And so in a sense, this really helps you to think through ideas about who we are, who we think people should integrate into, and also complicate some of the categories that we tend to take for granted. To conclude, which is also interesting, you can think also in terms of this super diversity in relation to entrepreneurship, and the extent can be mapped in the city. So this map is part of a research project coordinated by Lucy Hall at the London School of Economics, and is showing the place of origin of people working on a street in Birmingham. You can see how the layering of migration is also captured in a single roads there. So you can see a lot of people coming from colonial migration, from post-Soviet migration, from the Middle East crisis, and then from intra-EU mobility. And some of the places where people learn to negotiate between diversity are marketplaces, public spaces. This is why it's important to think about also the role of public spaces in a place where people find a way of communicate to each other. So beyond the idea of the perfect English, this is something about, and this is a part of an interesting project. I'll not be able to show you the video now, that is carried out at the University of Birmingham called TLANG, where they have basically done an ethnography of the interaction in the fruit and vegetable markets in Birmingham, looking how people find a way to communicate, and also how the kind of product you sell have been reinvented, sometimes even across the cycle of a week. So some days it's known that fish is bought by mostly English, like because on the Friday you have the fish and chips kind of thing. But other groups tend to buy fish other days of the week. It's quite interesting to see how, from the point of view of someone selling fish, this sort of they try to incorporate and cater for the different audiences as well. So just to conclude, the kind of work we are doing now, IRIS is based in the School of Social Policy, but also link up with people that work on social linguists, with people working around nutrition, with health experts, with people working around business and histories, and trying to understand how we can talk to each other to understand this new complexity of society. Some of the work we are doing are about reinventing the concept of integration through the idea of what we call social anchoring. What basically keep us together? You know, in a sense, one of the assumptions would be, oh, we are so super diverse, we should be a continuous conflict. Well, we are not in continuous conflict. So there is something that holds us together. It would be important to think about what are the roots of solidarity somehow, and how they've changed over time. But also about welfare bricolage, and where people look for support, and in a time where we're seeing the shrinking of the state, and finally around how different groups may have different health needs, and how they stand, what they stand the social service cater for them. If you're interested to find out more about what we do, we are organizing an international conference on the 23rd and 24th of June. There will be also a live stream of it, but I mean, you're welcome to look at our website to find out more. Okay, thank you.
I think we're all sat there, just kind of poised for a moment. Questions, comments from anybody? Don't forget to shout. I can't believe there's total silence. Speechless, is that? David?
I'd just really like to know what you see as the future impacts of the study are going to have in terms of our understanding of the migration and diversity that you talk about. What do you think the future impacts might be on Birmingham, for example?
I think the local authority in Birmingham has made Superdiversity one of the key areas of their work. So they, in a sense, they've acknowledged this change that is happening, and they start to think, also working with some of us around how to make sure that public services and in a way the local authority is able to cater for this difference. One of the things which is happening is not just about the more nationality, is that there is a rapid change. You know, what we're seeing at the moment is a rapid change of the population. There is a lot of turnover. How can public service deal with this? So it's not about, you know, I have people from one group, they are always here, I need to have an interpreter that speaks the language, I understand what are the cultural specificity there. It becomes more difficult now. So we need to understand how we can reinvent ourselves, what kind of resources can be brought in, also involved the community, but not basically just replacing the state in many ways. There's also the state need to be changed in a sense. I think another key issue is around the extent to which we have seen also recently in the local election here in London, the risk of antagonizing groups, and to the extent to which instead we should work around what hold things together, people together, and something that you need to emphasize, embracing that, like Carolina is doing, we really think do a lot in terms of addressing social tension and cohesion, not starting the blaming game, especially in a situation of severe budget cuts to various services, which is the risk that we're seeing very easily. So there is also a sense of increasing awareness of a diversity that is there to stay. So even, what I say sometimes, even if they manage to cut down migration to zero, this doesn't change the diversity in this country. In a sense, there are people here, and they are having kids, and they are in many ways they're British. It's not something that you can reverse that easily in many ways, unless you are going through major traumatic and violent events.
Thank you. It's really fascinating, actually, and really interesting to see how rapidly the population is changing, and I think it follows what's happening around the world. And I'm an ESOL teacher, so my classroom changes with every conflict that happens in the world, basically. I think it's really important to see who people are, but is there any scope for your research to value the contribution that these people bring to the cities that they decide to establish themselves in?
Yeah. I mean, one of the projects I've been working on now, like a few years back, was around the positive contribution that refugees bring to Britain. And you can articulate in various ways the concept. I mean, one of the, it's not directly related to superdiversity, but I mean, this is how do we use the term is also an issue there. In a sense, superdiversity in a way is a way of capturing a reality that we see in terms of here, but it doesn't explain me the cause of it. So, you know, it's war that is producing the fact that a lot of people are moving around. War has become much more spread. You know, you don't have the one macro conflict. You have several conflicts which are linked to various geopolitical reasons, which bring people here in many ways. And so trying to understand the extent to which there is a connection between something that happened elsewhere here is a crucial element. So it's not just about Einstein was a refugee, which is good to tell to students, but it is also something about the awareness of the interconnectedness of, even the wealth of this country and how it relates to, the poverty in another country, in a sense. So the people bring that story. They also bring the direct experience of violence and the consequences of some of the policies they are pursued. And it's actually important that the voice is heard. How do you create space for the voice to be heard? It's not easy. And I think there is increasingly the need for fora where there is a possibility to not just to express the voice, but also to work out potential conflict, so where things can be worked out, not just announced. So it's not just about I give you a statement, it's about bringing people to talk. And in this case, with if you reduce spaces like public library or points where people encounter and everything become, you buy your thing in Amazon, you go to the market, you lose some of the spaces where this encounter happen normally. You want to think about also this kind of side effects of disappearing of public spaces.
Is there any way your research could be used as ammunition to stop the cuts in ESOL? Very direct question, very self-centered.
Some of the research my colleague do is about the refugee integration and look at basically there is only one large survey about the impact of refugee integration over time. And one of the findings there is about the importance of early on provision of language and how important the acquisition of English is crucial to the success and positive outcomes to what happens after they get the status. So this is actually a survey that was done by the Home Office, the same one that then cuts resources. So, I mean, the problem is you cannot always answer with rational argument in the current debate, I'm afraid.
First of all, I really like the part of the market because I really believe that in market people are getting closer and are developing their languages. Are you studying also how the other cultures are influencing the language, a local language, like how the other cultures coming to UK are influencing with their languages and their culture, English, for example?
Not me personally, because I'm not a linguist, but in this project that they did the film about the bullring market. It's actually run by Angela Christ and Adrian Blackledge, that are two social linguists in Birmingham that are linked to IRIS, and is a lot about not just how people negotiate, but also the long-term impact in terms of how the language change. So it's about communication rather than grammar, in a sense, which is the opposite we are going at the moment.
Any more questions or comments? Okay.
You mentioned before that part of your research is all around the sort of the roots of solidarity. Could you say a little bit more about that? Any initial findings that you might have, or where you're up to with it?
It's not as much as finding, because it's an area which is actually almost difficult to capture. One way of looking at this is is clearly, if you look at society super diverse, one of the risks is to fragment it. So it starts to be almost like society become a much more fluid concept. It's actually hard to understand how people find a way to work together and cooperate. So it's almost about thinking about to look at specific instances or campaigns or initiatives where instead has been possible to build bridges that cross the usual divides. So, and that will be much more is about a research agenda than something that has been already done. This is something that I see as a really crucial to do, because otherwise, if we are just observing reality without thinking about how people continue to work together towards things, and we need to understand how do you build these links, and what can be done to facilitate them is also crucial. So what if you need spaces, if you need to put resources, if you need to you change the narrative in the way that we tell who we are, that basically essential. What can help?
I think you sort of just covered it, but my question is mainly to do with kind of people who feel, perceive themselves to have been left behind in all of this. And, you know, obviously we've mentioned the impact of kind of cuts and, you know, just to give a bit of background, I come from an area where there is a large white working class community who essentially feel they are not part of this globalised world. They don't want to be part of this globalised world. If they could turn the clock back to some sort of bizarre version of the 1950s they have in their head, they truly would. And how do we manage that while recognising that they're suffering from significant kind of social disadvantages at the same time as sort of trying to, I suppose, build those bridges, like you say, with kind of communities that are perceived to be new or incoming or whatever?
This is a big question, as you can imagine. One of the ways, I guess, is to understand that, I mean, I'll give you an example. I've been recently involved in the debate about the unaccompanied minors. Should the government accept 300 or 3,000 unaccompanied minors from Europe or not? And there has been a lot of emphasis about this number. So what is the right number? What we can cope with? And one thing I pointed out, and the government, in a way, what it has managed to do has been to shift the responsibility about the number from themselves to the local authorities. So now in the new version of what is called the Dubs Amendment, they look compassionate. So this sort of the compassionate conservative ideas. Yeah, we accept to get the people in, but we only accept the one that local authorities tell us that we can actually cater for. The problem is, obviously, you are in a situation where local authorities are facing massive cuts in the services they provide to children in general, and to vulnerable children in particular, and to foreign children even more. So obviously, unless there is a large resource put into this, it's very hard to see them providing, you know, being open to support these young people. There is also another risk that the government may put a lot of resources just for these groups. Because what happens is that the situation is exactly the one that you described. Then there will be the local vulnerable children who will start to complain and say, why the resources go on these people rather than on us? So the point is that, you know, the responsibility is not of the young children that are escaping war or persecution here, but is on the government that decides to cut the resources, in a sense. And the other point that I'd like to point out is that in 2008, when there was no refugee crisis, you know, local authorities in Britain were receiving more unaccompanied minors than they're receiving now. Yeah. So why now this number seems too big? It's nothing about the number per se, but it's about the kind of resources that are available. And then there is this tapping and all the anti-austerity debates. So the problem is that at the moment, what we're seeing now, that clearly there is a transformation of the welfare state. I mean, I feel I'm moving a bit on the tangential here, but anyway. But in a sense, what we're seeing is that an adjustment that started after the end of the Soviet Union in terms of the downsizing of the state, or the welfare state, and ideological downsizing. And we have the emergence of nationalism in many European countries in particular, partly playing as a way of diverting attention towards, you know, to blame the poor, the victims within this game.
I've just got one. Justin Trudeau said what we need to make this kind of vision that he has too, and that Canada's trying to work to, is we need education for people. So I guess part of what we're doing here today is we're talking about part of the education sector, and whether the education sector has a role to play in that, and if it does, how do we make sure the education sector is fit for purpose to do that, to be part of the solution that helps?
It's clearly part of the solution, that's obviously, but it's also in a way one of the sectors that are often complain. I mean, they are really experiencing of this transformation in terms of the role that we expect the sector to have. You know, in a sense, they are a bit like the NHS work. In a sense, they are really under pressure from the system. Just last week, I was involved in a panel group discussing this new model on the migration in Britain that is going to be introduced for next September. It was about producing tools and resources that will be useful to the... That is an important change. In a way, is almost one positive side effect in what is a bad reform, to understand. But it will be an important potential of work to be done, in the sense of rethinking about the migration, not as... we are linking it to the history of the country more closely. So to look at colonialism, to look at... the EU, to look at the war happening in the world and to see basically how migration is linked to this effect. It's not just an extra. So it is an interesting attempt. It will be really important to engage with teachers about using it. And the other major resource is, as you were saying before, you know, in the classroom nowadays, the classroom are really a laboratory of the society that is to become. You know, and it's really important to get the stories from the classroom going out. So making an effort to tell these stories about how one manage within a classroom to find a way of communicating and also to inventing a society, the society of the future. I don't think there is the appreciation, in a sense, of this potential that is there. You know, the fact that was just said that the Prime Minister of Canada was trying to do that. I mean, you need to have that appreciation from the top down, in a sense, in order to make the potential for that energy to go up and go into society more broadly.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much indeed. We're going to have a little scene change for just 2 minutes, so that's just a shuffle in your seats rather than a get up and wander around one. While we ask Jane and David, I don't really want the lectern and make sure your slides are ready. Thank you very much, Nando. Yes.